ਅੱਜ ਦਰਦਮੰਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਦਰਦੀਆਂ ਤੱਕ ਆਪਣਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਅੱਜ ਵੇਲੇ ਲਾਸ਼ਾਂ ਵਿਛੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਲਹੂ ਦੀ ਭਰੀ ਚਨਾਬ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਂ ਪਾਣੀਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜ਼ਹਿਰ ਰਲਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਪਾਣੀਆਂ ਦਰਦ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਪਾਣੀ ਲਾ
Prior to 1947, India was ruled by Britain for over 200 years, first ruled by the British East India Company and later by the British Raj. India was separated by a British lawyer, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, on August of 1947. He had little knowledge of the country India. It was in his power to divide India in a short 5 weeks. His simple division on the map completely changed the lives of 15 million that were mandated to relocate and the 2 million lives that were lost, leaving them to identify as Indian or Pakistani. Punjab was split into half, known as Charta Punjab, present-day Punjab, Linda Punjab, present-day Pakistan.
I mean, this is something that would have took years if they wanted to do the border. It would have like taken them years. Like it's a process. And they did that in such a short span of time where this guy literally just like drew this line and was like, all right, this is what we're gonna, go with. They were in a hurry to get back to England. I think it was like around that time after the war, they were trying to speed things up so much where they didn't care what happened, to the country. They didn't care what happened to the people. There was already again all this like propaganda happening, so it was kind of like, okay, we're just gonna leave this mess and move forward.
The atrocious partition divided many families, friends, and neighbors. Between the two now countries of India and Pakistan, there's little to no communication across. It caused many people to lose connection from country to country. Those who were left behind were either dead or, if lucky enough, adopted by a family. Decades later, some that were fortunate enough were able to reunite. It would be assumed that letters were sent across both countries, but it was nearly impossible to keep in contact.
ਉਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਪਾਉਣ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਜਾਣ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਦੇ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਲੱਭਦੇ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਲੱਭ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਲੱਭਦਾ.
As the partition unfolded, Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs were forced to migrate to new lands. Homes were abandoned and left behind. People had to make the choice between keeping valuables or protecting their lives while they were escaping. Pakistan was dedicated to Muslims and India was dedicated to Sikhs and Hindus. Muslims in India were deeply divided and the Muslim League did not want to accept Indian independence if they were being governed by a Hindu-dominated Congress party. As a result of this, it was agreed between the Britain Prime Minister Clement Attlee and the Indian leaders that two nations should be created. The Radcliffe Line was the boundary line between the new separated India and Pakistan. The partition led to the largest mass immigration with approximately migration of 15 million people by foot to their new religious homeland.
ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਗਏ ਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਸਮਾਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀ ਉਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਰੇ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ.
It was noted that violence led to scenes of bungalows and mansions being burned or looted, rapings and children being killed in front of their parents and siblings. The images of trains which carried refugees between nations arrived full of corpses after encountering mobs. These are just some of the brutalities of the partition, hidden and not widely broadcasted.
ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ 2-3 ਦਿਨ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਆ ਗਏ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਜਾਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਜਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ ਫਿਰ ਜਥੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਤਲਬ.
Sudarshana Kumari was an 8-year-old during the partition. She mentions how the best option for survival was staying quiet. She and her family hid in an area of a Muslim-dominated village in Pakistan. She would go days without food and could hear the begging cries of those in her neighborhood being killed or tortured. Her town was a site of ash and rubble, with dead bodies lined along the streets from people doused with oil and burned alive. She mentions that minutes before it was her turn to be killed, a ceasefire order was announced and trucks rolled from villages and cities, stopping all the bloodshed, which saved her
That
life.
happened, during that time. My BBG had mentioned that they weren't even wearing shoes because they didn't know at what point they were going to have to run, and shoes would have slowed them down. So they weren't even wearing shoes. They didn't have food. People were throwing away their kids. My BBG actually, she saved her cousin's baby by helping carrying her because she was a newborn. And so many people were like, hey, just throw her away, like she's slowing you down. It got to the point where mothers, and it was just, in order to protect, yourselves and, your family, you had to just, do that. And, to think, it's unimaginable, the scenarios that they had to kind of live through, the violence that they had to see. One of their family members actually took a bullet for my BBG and her, a couple of other family members that she was with. So, people were protecting one another the best they could. Even with giving them, they had, somebody else had given them money for a bus. So, it was just people were kind of trying to help out as much as they could, even with food, but again, it was just so hard at that time, right? We have no idea what
the role of servicemen was a main reason for accumulated violence in Punjab. The Sikhistan issue that Sikhs are deemed to an independent Sikh state was a covered-up role of violence. The actual job of servicemen in this time was to protect their country, as it was their duty to maintain law and order. However, the army, policemen, and civil service officers perpetuated violence instead of controlling it.
The scale of violence that was presented in Punjab allowed both India and Pakistan to agree that immigration and the exchange of population in Punjab would be under military evacuation organizations. This resulted in headquarters of military evacuation organizations being set. During the partition, Punjab had been a military recruitment area for British India, and during the Second World War, 48% of the Indian Army consisted of men from Punjab. However, after the partition, large number of demobilized soldiers of Punjab, primarily belonging to Muslim and Sikh communities, committed violence on one another. It was said that the ex-servicemen attacked each other but did not possess any weapons and were professionally trained and carried out lethal brutalities.
Government officials were given a choice of which domination they wanted to join. These officials, including the deputy commissioner, who belonged to respective minority communities, had an adverse effect on Punjab and provided a sense of security in an atmosphere of communal tensions. Although with the departure of these leaders, the majority of community and tensions grew between individuals. Communication was deeply affected. There was no way for people to contact or communicate with others. Families lost connection with each other, and some reunited decades later, while others simply vanished with no trace. National identities were covered up by the Indian government and are still kept hidden from public view. It is important now that we communicate knowledge and remember this large massacre as a monumentous event in history.